Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. Picture this. You're scrolling through social media and you come across one of those sappy friendship quotes. You know what I'm talking about. They'll say something like this: real friendships can survive anything. Or perhaps, a true friend is by your side through all of life's dramas, no matter their own troubles. And you think to yourself, that is the type of friendship I want. I don't blame you. We all want to boil friendship down into these catchy quotes that give us guardrails on how to navigate these relationships. But that isn't the reality. We all know that friendships are actually robust and that there is no one right way to approach them. Life's constantly throwing us different paths and curveballs, and both impact our friendships. Maybe you moved away for college or chased that dream job or just got caught up in the whirlwind of your own life in this season. And suddenly you wake up one day and you realize that those friendships you thought would last forever, the true friendships, the real friendships, well, they don't quite feel the way they used to. Joining us today is Marie Paige. A lawyer by day and a writer of fantasy worlds by night, Sarah's going to share some of her own friendship moments where she realized that friendship isn't a passive relationship. We all have to do the work. And some examples she shares are trying to reconnect with old friends after a big pause, only to realize everything's different. The work of approaching a friend with curiosity and doing the work to solve a problem in that friendship together. And the work of seeking out new friends. In Sarah's case, friends in the writing community. Now, she talks a little bit about how there might be some duds in that search, but continuing to do the work and put yourself out there will lead to the right people that finally surface for you. So if you have ever found yourself clinging to those social media friendship quotes, desperately hoping that they're true, today's episode is for you. We're going to get honest about what it takes to build and maintain meaningful connections. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
I am very excited that you're here. I know that you're not necessarily like what do I even call myself? Like a friendship influencer. That's not what I'd call myself. But this does play a really important part in your life and is something you're really passionate about. And I can see that through your work. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and like where community and friendship comes in that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am an attorney by day and an author by night. I have really worked to build a community in both of those areas. So not only a community of attorneys and people that I can lean on there, but also the writing community. Writing can be, if you let it, a really solo endeavor. When you write a book, you are not usually writing it with other people. You're sitting by yourself, writing, making up the words and the worlds. It can be lonely. And especially writing too is fraught with rejection. And so finding a community there has been incredibly important to me.
And I love this fact. When you reached out about being on the podcast, you told me that each one of your books is a love letter to a specific friend.
Yes.
So there's like an underlying theme there. Do your friends know which book is a love letter to who?
Yeah, they do. So I write young adult and new adult fantasy and fantasy romance. So the book that's the love letter to the specific friend, I've been stealing that friend's middle name and giving it as the middle name of the main character in the book. So I have a really good friend named Sarah Annis, and my first book, House of Smoke, her middle name is Annis. And in the book I'm writing right now, Serpent Green, Venom Blue, I guess I stole her first name, but I have a really good friend named Ariana, and the main character is Sienna Ariana. But more than that, and just like giving them the middle name, I really think about like, okay, what do they like? Like what tropes and what sorts of stories and what do they like to like read and what do they like to see and what gets them excited? And I really craft the book specifically for them and try and pull in as many tropes and things that they love as possible. It's actually really fun, and it's a fun challenge to be able to be like for example, my book House of Smoke, my friend Sarah hates traveling scenes. Like she hates like when characters travel, she's like, it's boring. And I was like, I'm gonna write you good traveling. Like I'm taking it upon myself. This is my challenge to myself. I'm gonna write you traveling that you like. And she read it and she was like, that was some pretty good travel. And I was like, yeah, I succeeded there.
Nobody can see me on the podcast, but I've been like putting my hand over my heart because I think this is so touching. Like, what a better way to honor your friends than to spend this much time thinking about who they are, what you love about them. But also, it sounds like maybe amplifying some things that you think are like their best qualities or their strengths, or they may not even maybe realize that about themselves, or you can amp it up to really show them the impact they have in the world. Oh, so beautiful.
Yeah, thinking about what they like and what they don't like. And it's a fun challenge.
Well, now people got to go find your books and give them a read. And don't tell me that you're adults out here who aren't reading young adult fiction. We all need to admit we're reading at least some of this somewhere. You need some easy reads. So now they know where to find that. And they can know that underlying, it's like a love letter to all your friends. But we came on here today. This kind of underlying theme of this episode is this idea that in order to have friendship, we can't just passively sit around. We have to put work into our friendships. And if we don't, quite often they'll fade away. So I think that you had a really relatable experience, maybe is a good way to put it, with your high school friends, and kind of this idea that, you know, society tells us that we're just going to be friends with these people forever. We aren't talking enough about how much work we have to put in. And I think a lot of people wake up one day and realize that those friendships have drifted. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience with like a group of friends and letting it fall away?
I would love to. So when I was in high school, I had a group of friends, and there were 7 of us total. And we even had a nickname. It was the 7 plus Kevin. Don't ask me who Kevin was. I don't know. It just rhymed with 7. But I had these friends, and we'd been friends since junior high. And I remember I would sit with one of them in her room, and we would plan out our lives and make guesses for who was going to get married first, and you know, where everybody was going to end up and what they were going to end up doing. And it just felt like we were going to be friends forever. It's kind of like that like scene in The Fox and the Hound when they're like little and they're like, we're going to be friends forever, right?
Mm-hmm. I love that movie.
I love that. Like if you want to like good cry, Fox and the Hound. But anyway, so I felt like we were going to be friends forever. Like I was like so close to them. I would go over to their houses like every day after school. People asked me what I did in high school, and like I didn't do sports or band or any of that. Like I hung out with my friends, like these specific friends. Then we went to college, and we all ended up going to different schools. At first, we kind of kept in touch through a blog. It was 2011, and so set up a blog, and there were 7 of us, and everybody had a day of the week. My day was Wednesday, and slowly over the course of several years, it wasn't like an all at once thing, but we drifted apart. You know, the blog kind of died. I think the blog lasted until maybe 2016 or 2017. So it lasted a long time and died kind of a slow death, but we drifted apart. Some of that was my own fault for just kind of assuming that they would always be there and would always be like ready to pick it back up. I got to the point where I would come into town, and sometimes I wouldn't even tell anybody I was coming into town. I would just come into town and like spend time with my family, but not really reach out to them as much. And I remember we finally moved back to Arizona, like in 2018. I graduated from law school. We moved back here so that I could practice law. Several of them had also moved back. And so I reached out and I was like, let's do lunch. Let's get in touch. It was almost like a wake-up call at that point, like trying to go to lunch with them, like a sad wake-up call that the relationship had changed so much. And, you know, looking back, like 7 years is a long time.
Yeah.
And some of them stayed in touch and were still like best friends. And I think they still are. And then there was me, and I just like didn't feel like I fit anymore. And I remember like actually grieving the loss of those relationships. Like it was a grieving process. And I was like ready to like pick it back up from where we left off. And a lot of them were like, no, we've moved on.
Yeah.
Without you. And that was hard.
I mean, understandably so. And I think so many people are going to listen to your story. And like I said, feel like it's relatable, whether it's, I mean, some people are probably like, wow, that was pretty take by take my exact experience. And other people are going to relate to parts of it. But it's hard, right? Because society's narratives just tell us that if there are real friends, our true friends, they'll just always be there for us. And we're not talking enough about the fact that in order to maintain our friendships, we have to do the work. We have to keep reaching out. We have to prioritize seeing each other when we're home. We have to at least, if we're not going to see each other, say, you know, hey, I'm coming home. It doesn't work this time, but can we connect in other ways? Can we set up some calls? Can we travel and see each other? Can we, you know, I know the blog is dying, but can we figure out a new way to like do regular check-ins? And it makes sense that things change, but it's work for like, as we change and life circumstances change, us to keep our friendships alive. And we're not talking about that work. And then we invite people out to lunch and have this really hard realization that, oh my gosh, nothing is the same. And that sucks. Like wholeheartedly, that is 100% a grieving process. That is hard. That is sad. But I just think we're setting ourselves up collectively for failure because we're not talking about the fact that we can't just assume they'll always be there with no work.
And that's not fair to them to assume that they're going to sit around and wait for you and that they're going to like not grow and change themselves and not like find different priorities and different relationships. Like you're almost expecting that the world like revolves around you and come into with that mentality. And that's a selfish mentality to have. And I really think the true friendships that those were true friendships. And like, they were like my best friends for many years.
Yep.
But my strongest friendships, when I look back at the different relationships that I have, are the ones where there's a selfless quality to them. And they're like, I just care about you and I want to see you succeed and be happy. And like, you know, what can I do to lift you up? And so if you're expecting them to stay the same and to not change and to not grow and just be sitting there waiting for you to come back, I think that's a selfish take.
I want to maybe offer a reframe on this whole selfless idea. Listening back when Sarah talks about this idea of them being selfless, it caught my attention. I thought to myself, like, okay, is that really what's happening here? And it might be, but I am hesitant around the word selfless because a couple of reasons. Number one, I think that in today's day and age and in this time, a lot of our cultural commentary is about being more selfish, right? Putting up more boundaries, taking back time for yourself, owning your full vibe, your full humanity, your full essence, whatever. And so if I'm out here just being like, be selfless, I think that a lot of people are honestly just going to turn off the podcast. The other thing is that when we talk about this idea of being selfless, I get nervous that people out there who have those people-pleasing tendencies are going to fall into this trap of feeling like their best friendships are when they forego, again, like their own needs. So I started really thinking about this idea because I think there's something here, but maybe we just need like a rebrand. We need some new terminology, a new way to think about this. And as I was letting my mind wander, something that came to me was something that relates actually to community building. Stick with me here. When you talk about building a community, you often talk about like, why? Why are you building this community? Why are you bringing these people together? What is the shared purpose of this community? And in a community, in a big group, that's really important because you need to explain to people why spend your time with this group of people. But I think that we have shared purpose or a why in our friendships. Because when I think about what Sarah said, some of my strongest friendships also have this selfless quality. But I think maybe a stronger rebrand for that is some of my strongest friendships have a strong why. We have a strong understanding of, as two friends, why we show up for each other, what we hope this friendship looks like long term, what our shared purpose is. And I think in some of my best friendships, that why centers around this idea of growth. Like our why is to support each other in growing into the happiest, healthiest versions of ourselves. And so when we have that why, it kind of gives us both this understanding that what we want at the end of the day is for each of us to go after our dreams, to let go of things that aren't serving us. And that's a guiding value in our friendship that helps us to understand when we need to be doing the work, right? Because as we navigate change, it might be easy to be like, oh, I don't want my friend to do this thing. And that sounds selfish. So therefore I should be selfless. Or I can rebrand this and be like, we both value growth and change in this friendship. That's our why. We want to encourage each other to be our best versions of ourselves. And therefore I'm going to lean in and do the work here. Maybe we all just sit with that. But I think it feels like a more powerful rebrand. It doesn't feel like we're losing ourselves. It feels like we are leaning in. And honestly, also, like I'm also growing as I'm doing the work to navigate the changes. Do you think that when you were away, when you were at college and law school, those times where you didn't live nearby and whatnot, and I don't know the answer to this, I'm just purely curious. Do you think that they were trying to do the work, like that they were trying to reach out to you and you were just like, not now, maybe when I move back, I'm too busy? Or do you think it just like mutually both sides kind of let it go?
I think it was a mutual thing. Like when I look back, I definitely see my hand in it and the part that I played. And when I look back, I'm like, okay, I could have done more to try and like preserve those relationships. At the same time, I don't think that it was just me. It wasn't like somebody else was just like reaching out their handed. And I don't think that's healthy either in a relationship, to have one person always putting in all of the work to keep that relationship strong and then having the other person just take it for granted. And that's not healthy either.
No, I agree with that. I agree with what you're saying. And the only reason I was asking that is because I do think, you were saying like the selfish thing. I do think sometimes people just are like, friendship's not a priority right now. So one side, like their other friend, is trying to make an effort and they're not reciprocating and they're not maybe even communicating like, hey, I really care about you, but I just like the next 2 months are really rough. I've had that with friends. But then I think there's also this thing that happens, which sounds like it's maybe more what happened to you, where because your friendship is really built on proximity and the idea that you saw each other at school every day. And you did set up something great with the blog, but it maybe like wasn't enough to keep the friendship as close as it was. And then because neither side really put in the effort, there starts to be this like, oh, well, it's not the way it was. We're not really that close anymore. Then you feel like overwhelmed by reaching out because you'd have to do so much work to talk about the fact that you used to be so close and things feel different now. And like, how do we reconnect in our new versions of ourselves? So that's, I guess, really where I'm going with this is in order when you moved back for you to have rekindled this friendship, both sides have to decide they want to do the work to build a new version of the friendship. And it can be hard sometimes when we kind of like initiate this idea of rekindling, like, hey, I moved back. Let's go back to being friends. And the other side doesn't have the same intention. They're like, I can't do this work right now. I don't have capacity. I think we're so different. I don't really want to. Like, whatever that reason is, that can be so hard to realize.
And it can be, and it would have been probably starting over.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just thinking, I'm contrasting that to another relationship. So I actually am still like very close to this person. But around the pandemic, I kept trying to reach out. And, you know, we used to live, so she was a friend that I met in college. And so we used to live really close to each other again and then moved. And so I kept trying to reach out to do like a video call with her just to catch up and see how she's doing. And she would blow me off. And this happened like several times where like she would just like stand me up. And then like she would text me several hours after we were supposed to meet and say like, oh, I'm so sorry, you know, something came up. Like that, like got to be like really frustrating. Also with my friendship attachment style, I was like, I'm a little bit anxiously attached, like, and need the assurance, right? And so I was like, hey, and I sent a message to her. I just like, as a heart to heart, I was like, it sucks to be stood up.
Yeah.
Because I have other things that I could be doing with my evening. Instead, I'm sitting around waiting for you to respond, not knowing if you're going to respond. You know, I feel like I can't like move on until just like let me know. And she comes back and she says, I feel terrible that I've been doing that. Also, I have been dealing with severe depression lately. And I just like didn't even know that she was going through that. And I will say, I think that experience brought us a lot closer as friends, just getting to have a heart to heart there, you know, and me saying, hey, I am like anxiously attached. I cannot move on until I know. And so it's like hard to just be left in the dark. And she's like, I am just like struggling with severe depression. And I just sometimes I can't even like, you know, look at my phone to tell you.
And that is such a beautiful example of two people doing the work. Because you were honest and said, hey, this is making me really upset. And she was vulnerable and told you what was going on. And both of you had to open up. And because you could have just said to yourself, oh, this is the fourth time she's done this, I'm done.
Yes.
And that would not be doing the work. And that probably would have ruined your friendship. You also could have told her, like, hey, this makes me really upset. And she could have just said, sorry.
Yeah.
And that probably also would have been the friendship. Like, what a beautiful example of how you both did the work to keep it going. For as much as I try and come up with those examples, you just gave such a great one.
And I will say now that it was very scary to send that message, because when you're sending a message like that, like I am frustrated. People have blown me off like 5 times now. I don't remember exactly how many, but it was multiple times. I was like, this could be the end of this like relationship. Like I could be ending this relationship, and I do care about her. And like, that's a scary thing when you have someone who you consider a really good friend, who you're like, I could potentially be ending the relationship. But also at the same time, this is like limping along if you're not even going to tell me that you can't show up and if we made plans. Anyways, I will say that now, more than anything, she is one that I am okay just like bearing my soul to, and just like opening up and just saying, this is like how I feel and what's going on. And I think that stemmed from that experience, just like opening up and being vulnerable and having her acknowledge and validate that. And then also her opening up and being vulnerable back. It like opened up this channel and this pathway for really true and authentic communication.
And now it's this thriving friendship. And that's what so many people tell me that they want. And I think like deep down we do. We all want to feel connected to our friends like that. Do you have any other examples of ways, like, since you've now realized, you have to put your work in if you want this to be a positive area of your life, for friendship to be something that is enjoyable and supportive and all that kind of stuff. Do you have any other examples of ways that you're showing up and like putting in the work now with your friendships?
So several, because after the friendship died with the high school friends, I looked at the people in my life and I said, for the people that I want in my life, I have to do the work to keep you in my life. Otherwise, it's going to be the same thing all over again. And that sucked. And I don't want to go through that.
Yeah.
So things that I do are, I firstly make an effort to reach out to them. And that can look like a lot of things. Sometimes that looks like video calls just to catch up. Sometimes that looks like texting them. Sometimes that looks like taking trips out to see them. I go to Utah to see my friend. I've only been once this year, but last year I think I went twice to go hang out with her and see her. I have another really good friend who's in Ireland, and I took a trip last year to see her. You don't have to take trips to Ireland to like, but taking the time and making the effort to reach out. I will say another thing that helps is approaching the friendship from a like selfless point of view, where you're just like, I am seeing that person as a person and just like caring about them as a human being that you love and you care for. For example, this is not my story. This is one of my really good friend's stories, but she is a writer friend. Mm-hmm. And there was a girl that she was friends with, and they would like swap books back and forth. So the girl reached out and said, will you read my book? And I'll read your book. And she said, yeah. So she read this girl's book, and it wasn't exactly her thing. It was kind of long. But she read it. She muscled through the whole thing, gave like constructive feedback. And then the girl read like the first 50 pages, I think, of her book, and then said, this is not for me. I don't like it. I think it sucks. And she said that she like cried her eyes out. That book actually is the one that got her an agent, and I read it. It's a good book. She's a phenomenal writer, and her agent clearly agreed with me because that's the book that got her representation. But, coming out, and then she said that the girl reached out like a couple like months ago, maybe. She's like, oh, she's reaching out again, asking me if I'll read something else from her. And she's like, and I will not. And I'm like, yeah. So, I mean, like, if you come at it like as a what can you do for me sort of thing, like people feel that and people pick up on that, even if it's not like from a very like like people can feel that. And so coming at those relationships, just like, okay, I care about you. What can I do to, show that I care about you? And like, are you having a bad day? Sometimes I have been known to like DoorDash my friends food if they're having like a particularly bad day. So I'll send them, I'm like, I can't get you an iced latte, but the DoorDash guy can bring you one. Sending them food, just checking in with them. Honestly, I think that friendships, like any relationship, it's about time and effort. So like making sure that you are putting in the time and making sure that you are putting in the effort. And that's going to look different for every relationship. Some are more time and they need more, and others need less. But ultimately, if you're like not putting in any time or any effort, then it's going to die. It's like a plant, right?
Our friendship's going to die like a plant? You don't say. Friends, I swear, I did not pay Sarah to plug it in that way. I did not tell her anything. Like, I say this in the best possible way, LOL, because you're right. I sure do think that friendships are like a plant. That's why I have created my entire Roots of Friendship framework. You can go listen to me talk all about it in episode 12, where I talk about how we need to start thinking about our friendships as if they are a tree or plant, and how we need to grow more roots, let roots die, give space, nourish those roots. Like, I seriously have a whole plant metaphor. Episode 12, go listen to it. Yeah, as much as the Instagram quotes would like to tell us that, they'll just always be there, that's not the reality. You have to put time, effort, energy into it. The other thing that you and I have talked about is this idea that, like, the other place to put in work is in going out and finding I'm going to say right people for you, but I'm going to clarify what I mean by right. Like, people who support you in something that you're currently doing in your life. Like, we specifically talked about you going out and finding other writers. And I think that that's really important to mention, is like, sometimes the best way we can put in work is, instead of trying to maybe force our other friends in our life to hold this like new venture or new passion or new interest that maybe is not their lane, to do the work to go out and supplement and find more people who are in that lane. You want to talk a little bit about like building up your writer community?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said at the beginning, writing can be very, very lonely. I wrote under a rock for like the first year that I wrote. And then on a whim, so this is like me, like classic Sarah, I joined a writers group. I do a lot of things on whims. I joined this writers group, and the group as a whole does not meet anymore. It kind of started up during the pandemic, and I think writing for a lot of people like was a pandemic hobby. And then as things like opened up and life started up again, people just kind of like stopped. But I did meet this one girl, and she's the one that lives in Ireland. Her name is Caitlin. She was really the first like writer friend that I had. And I was like, this is like great to be able to have someone to bounce ideas off of. And I decided that I wanted more. I will say finding friends, anytime you go out and you're like looking for friends, it's awkward.
Oh yeah, it's awkward.
Getting to know someone and like looking and like being like, hey, I want to be your friend. It's an awkward process, and you're not going to mesh with everybody. Some people you just hit it off with like right away. And you're like, I think you are my kindred sister from, I think you're my soul sister. And so for me, like that was Caitlin. Like Caitlin and I hit it off right away. I have another friend named Christina, and she's a writer friend, and we hit it off right away. I would consider her one of my best friends. Like between the two of them, I think I met Caitlin in 2019, and Christina I just met last year, about a year ago, actually. And between that, there are a lot of friendships of writers that just like did not work out because like for whatever reason, we didn't click. And so it's awkward. It's important. And those relationships, once you can have them, they're so worth it, which is why I'm determined not to let these ones die.
But you did the work.
I did the work.
Going out there and putting yourself in the groups and like wading through the awkwardness and finding these people who get what it's like to do something that maybe the other people in your life don't get. When you're talking about querying agents and the various drafts of edits and sensitivity readers, whatever, other people might look at you and be like, oh, does that take a long time? Like they don't even know what to ask. And there's something so nice about doing the work to find people who get the language you're speaking and like understand the process, and celebrating milestones with them is maybe a little bit sweeter, if I'm being honest, because they actually have some sense of what it took to get there. There's just something to be said about doing the work to add maybe a type of friend, or like a friend focused around a passion or an interest that you didn't have before.
I want to say like dealing with the rejection and the disappointment, like my writing friends get that on a level that my other friends do not. It's one thing. I love my husband. My husband is a great writing support and supports me in that hobby phenomenally. But when I get a rejection, he kind of gets it. He's an academic. He understands rejections from like literary journal or academic journals and stuff like that. But he doesn't get it the same way that my like writing friends get it when, and sometimes I'm like, I'm just going to like scream into the void and cry for a second because this is hard. And they're like, yeah. And at the same time too, like when they're having those days, I know exactly what you are feeling.
And it's understandable why you feel that way. And yeah, if you want to go scream at the wall, you should for sure do that because it's merited for this situation. Like I say this thing, which is that we're all such dynamic people and we owe it to ourselves to build a support system that is dynamic. Like your husband sounds great. He just doesn't get it quite the same way. And there's nothing wrong with that. So the best thing to do is to do exactly what you did and go out there and give yourself people who do get like exactly the thing you're going through and how much you care about it. And I think that's a great example of another way you can like do the work in your friendships. Sarah, I want to thank you for, honestly, just sharing some very vulnerable stories today. I think that we don't talk enough about friendship and kind of what's happening behind the scenes and the highs and the lows and the realities of, again, sitting down at a table and feeling like you don't even know these people anymore, even though you've been telling yourself they're your friends. And this is the kind of stuff that people are going to listen to and realize, oh, it's not just me. All because people like you will come on the podcast and tell your stories.
Thank you, Alex.
If you have ever found yourself in a situation like Sarah did at the beginning of this episode, where you have reached out to a friend or a group of friends and it's been a while and you get together and you realize, whoa, everything feels different here and I don't like it. I hope that this episode made you feel less alone. I think that this is a really common feeling that we just aren't talking about enough. And I think that you have options here. You might find that you just want to walk away like Sarah did. That is a totally valid option. Go put your energy somewhere else on building what you need in this season of life. But you might also decide that you want to rekindle some of these friendships. We don't discuss that in this episode, but I want you to know that that is possible. And the way that I would suggest you think about it is you're basically starting new friendships with these people, but with a little bit of a head start. You're kind of starting over, but with like some information, some insider information. And that is how I would suggest you approach this to build a new, strong version of this friendship. Sarah, I want to say thank you. You came on here and you shared a variety of stories that are real and honest examples of realizing that things in a friendship have fizzled, aka roots have died, and talking about what it looks like to accept and let go and put energy elsewhere into building what you need. Because that is the joy, is that you can always build the friendships and the connections that you want and need. It is never too late. You can always go out there and build the connections that you desire. Now, who's going to go out there and check out Sarah's books? Link in the show notes to those books she mentioned earlier that are, in my opinion, just basically love notes to her friends. And with that, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle @it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.